I'm going to start this with a story. I was cold emailed about a particular problem. It happened to be a problem that I was really thinking about at the time, which was related to like chargebacks. I was like, I wish there was a tool that could automate this. And sure enough, somebody cold emailed me and said, hey, we can automate chargebacks. I was like, yes, I'm interested. Let's get that meeting booked. Had the call with the rep, showed me the solution, looked amazing. I wanted it. So I basically was like, shut up and take my money. What are the next steps? And he goes, oh, well, we'll send you a proposal and you can look over it and sign off. Okay, sounds fair. I don't get the proposal. It's been 3 or 4 days. So I reach out and I'm like, yo, what's going on? I need a proposal here. And he was like, oh, well, okay, it's actually not done by me. It's done by accounting. He's like, I'm going to ping her. So then next week, I think I still haven't gotten it. So I reach out again. And then finally he reaches out. He's like, oh, you should have a DocuSign in your account or in your email. And then I open it and it's 12 pages of legalese with little check boxes. And so I look at it, I'm like, oh, I don't have time to look through this. Now he's following up with me, pinging me, hey, did you look at it? I'm like, yeah, I don't really understand what it's all about. And we have to get on another call. And it was such a painful buying experience. It's just such a perfect example of how you can really screw it up with the proposal. And a lot of people think about this as an afterthought. It doesn't matter. If you're already interested, it's just a piece of document. It's a napkin that we're going to send to you. If Amazon has one-click buying because they know that the more hurdles you put in place will keep people from buying, whether it's a $2 widget or a $200K proposal, like it matters. People are going to just resist things that are hard to do.
When someone is raising their hand saying they want to buy from you, the last thing you want to do is, to your point, put more barriers in place. And the proposal can be that document that sums up everything you've talked about with them and reinforces the value and basically reinforces their emotions that they already have, which is, I want this thing. The more you delay that process, the more that feeling for them starts to go away, and they're starting to look to fulfill that somewhere else, which is typically your competitor, if they haven't already been engaged with your competitor. So it's an extremely important part of the process that you need to nail down. And that's the thing we talk about with a lot of sales leaders is the ones who get it know that I can't just send a quote. I can't just send a price, because it's so competitive in most landscapes that you have to layer the value or tie the value to that price point. And if you don't, people are going to do what you did. They're going to open up the document, see a price, go, oh, geez, like I did want this, but maybe I should look to see if there's something cheaper, because they're starting to forget about the value and all that excitement you had built up when you talked to them. And so the proposal allows you to continue selling and reinforcing your value prop when you're not in the room.
The proposal is, in a lot of ways, it's a one-to-one. The proposal is personalized to just this one account, this one prospect. So in a lot of ways, it's like the original account-based marketing, the fancy term that people have come up with to basically say, like, we have a named account that we're going after and we're sending like highly personalized marketing materials to. That's literally what a proposal is. There's still a lot of boilerplate around it, but you're choosing a case study specifically for that one account. It's very different that way. And it has such an impact over your sales cycle, because in the example that I gave with this company, like imagine if while I was on the call and I was like, yeah, I'm ready, buy, he'd be like, check your inbox, it's there. I'll walk you through it, and then you just click a button and it's signed off and we're ready to go. Like the sales cycle could have been 1 day as opposed to weeks, and maybe losing it altogether. Generally,
in Proposify, when someone drafts and sends a proposal, I believe it's just over 2 days that proposal gets actioned. Think about your scenario. That's when you're just sending it blindly. I mean, if you're on the phone with them, absolutely, that's a great way to get immediate action. Making it easy for the buyer and then giving them a little optionality on do they want to do it right there and then. No problem if you don't, because you're going to have that in your inbox and you can action it then.
Another great example of this is one that I've heard from customers in the past, marketing agencies in particular, but I think it's applicable to any industry, which is, you talk about speed to lead, right? Like it's one of those things, if you can just get in front of a interested party faster, you will often close more or close faster. And it's very similar with the proposal. So in this case, they were like, because it's so templated and so quick that I can just get it in front of somebody like when they show interest, they were very excited because their marketing agency beat out VaynerMedia, Gary Vaynerchuk's company. I don't know if you're watching this, Gary, but big fan. I'm sure he's watching it. And they were able to beat them out. Why? Because their service was better, their price was... No, it was literally because we have to wait weeks to get a proposal from them, and you guys just sent us one today, and so we'll just go with you. Like, people really try to overcomplicate it. It's sometimes as simple as just getting them the proposal faster.
And I think a lot of it ties back to risk aversion. People want to take the time with that proposal because they want to get it right. But the underlying reason that they're so worried about it is they don't have the process set up. They don't have the standardization in place. They don't have go-to templates, a content library that's already pre-approved by marketing or accounting or whoever it is that they can just go to and pull that stuff in. And so that's why you see this big delay, is because everyone's trying to go through the proposal with a fine-tooth comb before it goes out. But if you do that work up front, yeah, there's some setup to it. But once you do that up front, and then you can have a sales rep put it together and maybe get some eyes on it first with an approval before it goes out, you can really cut down all of that BS, essentially, that bottleneck.
What we want to talk about now is the interesting things that have come out of our state of proposals research. We did it a little bit differently this year, where we actually use machine learning to better crawl through documents and proposals and categorize and group them so we can get more rich and meaningful information. So we're going to talk through some of these stats that we've learned about. The funny thing with any kind of these like state of research reports is that sometimes it's not surprising, but before that point, there was really no quantitative data to back up what we all intuitively know. And one of the things that came out that was I found quite interesting, but also it's sort of obvious, is that bigger deals take longer to close and have lower close rates. But what you can really see is that the smaller the deal, the faster it's going to close and the more likely it's going to close. We know that. I think our own internal data would say that as well. But what do you take from that, Scott?
Generally with smaller stuff, you're able to work with one, maybe two people on the buyer side. What happens generally as you get up into larger deal sizes, there's more stakeholders on the buyer side. Even if you have all of your process buttoned up, there's just going to be more hoops to jump through there. Therefore, it's going to take longer. There's so much bureaucracy and so many different priorities that they'll look at 10 things and do one.
And they sometimes have procurement teams who it's their job, or sometimes they're justifying their existence to put up roadblocks and hurdles and grind vendors down and all that kind of stuff.
Sales reps probably have like a little trauma with procurement, but if we're doing it right, we should be able to work with them well. I have a pretty good example of this. We got an opportunity with a big organization. We're talking like 5,000 employee company, generally outside of our ICP. They came inbound, so we wanted to work that opportunity. They're in the kind of construction adjacent space, working with like system automation and stuff like that. One of their teams wants to look at Proposify. We go through the whole evaluation process. They're excited about the tool. Then comes procurement. The real tough thing was you couldn't buy anything to your approved vendor. They have so many already approved vendors that what procurement tends to do is sort of just like bleed the deal out time-wise so that the buyer decides, you know what, maybe I just go with something that's already approved. And they're doing that because that's obviously going to save them costs. They've already got an agreement in place, probably some preferred pricing, and they don't have to add in this other tool, even if we were the better solution. And so that's the tough one where you don't always win those battles, but that's probably speaking to that lower close rate at times. And your point of they don't get the business reason behind it as much as just looking at the dollars and cents potentially. So you're going to see some lower close rates in that.
I think what works in a lot of cases in a variety of industries is starting small. Right? We all want to win the big deal. Like nothing would feel better than just like getting that $1 million deal over the line and having that signed off and everything that comes with it. But, sometimes the smarter approach is the longer term approach. So when I ran an agency, what we would do is we would find out, we were selling a lot of times to government where they had a certain threshold that if you exceeded it in price, then it would trigger essentially a procurement process where they'd have to go to RFP, and you would then be competing with other people who have publicly seen that RFP document and are responding to it. Obviously, that's going to drastically decrease your chances of winning it. So we would always find out what that threshold was, and we would come in under it. And sometimes if the deal was like 5 or 10K or kind of on the smaller side, you could bypass all of it altogether and just your champion, your contact, they could just approve themselves. They didn't need to go to anyone else. So what we would often do is sell an upfront project like a blueprint or a discovery project where we would say, hey, it's not the actual thing you want. Maybe it's the big software thing that you want us to build. It's the beginning stages that we would do anyway as part of that process. But by charging for it up front, we can give you the blueprint that then if you do need to take it to RFP, you'll already have fully thought out what the scope of it should be, because a lot of times those RFPs are just junk anyway and they're just guesswork. You end up proposing something completely different than what they asked for because they didn't even know what they were asking for. So that was one of the ways that we would do it. And I think in SaaS, it's similar with land and expand. Like we've had some success there.
The other thing that we'll look at doing is trying to get ahead of those types of processes. If there's any sort of IT, legal reviews, traditional procurement stuff, identify that as early as you can. Now, is it the first thing you're going to ask in the first time you talk to a prospect? No. But if you sense some interest on their end, starting to ask those types of questions like, hey, what else is going to need to happen from here for you to make a confident yes/no decision, or for you to get approval for this? People will give you the lay of the land. You don't have to get all the nitty gritty, but you could then start to suggest, oh, so there's an IT review. I know a lot of times those are questionnaires. Is that something you can fire over to me and I can get my team working on that questionnaire? That way you're not waiting and scrambling at the end. Legal tends to come up at the end. So even just having conversations with your champion or champions about what tends to get sticky with legal, because you may be able to at least internally start collecting that information or getting your ducks in a row. So again, you don't get held up as much at the end when it does come up. So it's things like that you can ask about proactively, and can also tell you a lot about the deal too. If they're really shut off to that, they may be doing almost like an informal RFP process where they're out there looking at 5 different vendors and you're one of many, and it's not really you in the front running.
Probably stuff that you could coach your reps on when you listen to their calls. You could probably identify those things where you go like, that was an opportunity to get ahead and ask about the procurement process or their IT review, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a interaction with a sales rep trying to sell me a tool, and he's like, "Yeah, let me know what you need for the procurement process." But the problem he ran into is he never asked me what steps there were. And I'm like, "We don't even have a procurement team, man." Like, his head was in the right place, but he didn't really ask me the question. So that's just step one. And for sure, these are things that you can coach through call reviews, obviously live too. If a manager's jumping in and doing some calls, sometimes I find those are the types of questions a rep might kind of forget to ask, and that's a great reason to have managers join some of these calls, because they can kind of come in and be like, hey, I'm the stupid guy that doesn't know anything. Tell me what would need to happen with this, and kind of play good cop, bad cop. So that's something that you can do if you do some team selling.
Something that came from the State of Proposals research was around proposals only sent to one person had a much lower likelihood of closing and a much lower close rate compared to those sent to multiple recipients. This shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Again, it's one of those things where it's sort of obvious, and yet, having the data to back it up is useful, because how often do we still find ourselves selling to prospects where we've got our one buyer and we can't loop other people into the deal, or maybe when we send the proposal for them to look at, we only have one person viewing it and they're not really forwarding it to their team and getting this sort of group buy-in.
To me, it's a big red flag. It tells you that you're missing something generally. Now, everyone gets the bluebird every once in a while, which is the deal that comes in hot and everything goes your way and closes in a week. But the majority of deals, there's likely a few people involved. The person who generally holds the purse strings or signs off on a proposal doesn't always do the initial research and investigation. They're tasking someone. If you put yourself in the shoes of the person that's tasked with it, they want to get all the information because they were told to go do something. Hey, go figure this out. But in reality, they can't really make the final decision. So it's just trying to be conscious of that. And that's where expectation setting is really big, and particularly at least in our sales cycles of, hey, we're going to get to proposal. We're going to get you all the information you need. We can tell you the price the first time we talk. That stuff's all good. But in reality, there's not a whole lot of value in us sending you something that's half-baked today, because so much of what goes into our proposal is crafted for you. And so we need to talk about what matters to you and understand that and show you how we're going to solve it. Then we can put that all into the proposal. And then when we get the right people in the room, we're having a really meaningful conversation. That makes that initial person look really good. And the great thing with proposal metrics in a system like ours is you can identify that. I mean, if you make the mistake maybe of sending it early, you still have a chance to loop those people in. And that's what I always say to my team is, discovery is a process, not an event. So if you haven't uncovered that someone else needs to be involved, better late than never. And maybe the proposal helps you do that because you do see it get forwarded, or you do see that there's not a lot of engagement, so you start to ask yourself the questions, start to ask your prospect the questions.
Yeah, it makes me think of this time that a director of sales from a company reached out about using Proposify, and I got excited because it was a big logo. But I happened to sort of know the CEO, not personally, but I'd just been at an event and, we said hi and all that kind of stuff. I was multi-threading and I emailed him. right, the CEO, and I said, hey, Joey on your team, I'm calling Joey, is interested in Proposify. And he shot it down so quickly. He was like, oh, yeah, he always just runs and does things, and we're already using the tool and absolutely no interest. I'm like, okay, cool. And I spent no time on it.
Yeah, I remember that. If you have someone like that wants to champion a solution, it's not like you want to write them off right away, but it's just about building up the business case. And so that's something that goes into a proposal, and it kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier. You don't want to send that early with no business case, and it's just buy my widget, no context. You want to have really thought out that whole reason for it. Because I think if you maybe would have emailed that CEO with a bunch more context as to why Johnny was looking at this, maybe it changes it.
What we know from the state of proposals is that proposals that have a huge word count are going to close at a lower rate. And we've had some customers have 100-page proposals, and maybe that's needed when you run when you're dealing with an RFP process that requires it. But what we just tend to find is that there is a sweet spot for length, and you don't want to just send a quote with just the numbers, but you also don't want to go the opposite direction and send a 100-page document that literally nobody's going to read.
By customizing certain elements of your proposal to the conversations and to the customer, it feels like it's for them, so they want to check the stuff out. I think what engages a lot of people with tools like Proposify is the interactive capabilities of online proposal, right? So your exec summary, it could be a video. It could have images. Your pricing table, it could actually be something that they can plug and play with, meaning they could change some of the numbers in the table and see how that impacts the investment they're about to make. Obviously, they can sign off on the document. They can also comment on it, right? So there's value beyond the words on the page, and they can start to really think about, am I going to do this? What happens if I want to tweak it slightly? Or reminding themselves of why they're here with your nice video. So there's all those things that can happen in the proposal, and that doesn't take a lot of pages. It just takes thought around how are you going to make that proposal for your customer. I'd say the biggest misstep I see with proposals is they're way too much about the seller. Here's every little nitty-gritty thing about the service or product that I sell and 20 different options on every widget. People don't want that. That creates indecision. You want to have it very specific. Can there be some optionality? Sure, but within the realms of something that I'm not going to get decision fatigue on.
Definitely, I've seen agency proposals in particular that always start with the awards, our awards that we won, which is silly. From State of Proposals, we actually have a graph that shows, and we can bring it up on the screen here, the sections that get viewed for the most amount of time versus the ones that don't. And it isn't overly surprising. Pricing and contracts are the ones that get the most time spent on the page. Then you get into some of the more our approach, our solution, and scope and all that kind of stuff. It's usually sitting around 3 to 4 minutes. The stuff that gets the least amount of viewed is actually the about us and the team, and that kind of content gets viewed the least amount of time. It doesn't mean don't include it. It's good to have there. It is what sort of separates a proposal from a quote, is that if you do need to include some things from people who aren't involved in the sales cycle, who haven't talked to you already or haven't been to your website, it's good to include that stuff about hey, here's the people who will be working on your account, or here's some notable logos or other companies that we work with. Don't not include that, but it's just know that it's not going to get viewed a whole lot, and you don't want to front load your proposal with it.
One of the things that we include in our proposal is actually a roles and responsibilities chart, which seems kind of oh, you really need that? But the biggest reason we include it is to show who we've talked to on the buyer side and what we understand about their role, because that really demonstrates that we understand their business. No one cares who their CSM is going to be before they meet that person. Sure, we put that in for our side, but it's way more about what have we learned from the buyer side.
Showing who their CSM is answering that question that a lot of buyers have very early in the sales process, which is what does the onboarding piece look like? What does the support look like? People are not as, at least in the case of software, what is the actual experience in the service, and what if I need help or support? And they want to know those things. This reinforces, we will take care of you once you sign on.
Personally, I've even bought tools that seem great when you see the demo and have a sales rep clicking through, and then you go to roll it out with your team and it falls really flat. One, maybe because the training wasn't properly done, or you weren't integrated properly, things like that. So many times you see churn or people move from software to software because of those things. It has nothing to do with the actual capabilities of the tool. Being able to showcase in your proposal how you're going to take care of the customer is huge.
I want to go back to the interactive pieces a little bit. So, because there's a lot there that we could cover. So let's talk about video. This is something that in our latest state of proposals, we found 22% of proposals have video in them. It's actually maybe even higher than I would have expected because it is just an underused thing. And it also varies by industry. So we can bring up the chart that shows all the industry breakdown. You'd be surprised at like some industries, how they're sending proposals with more video in them. But it's really a missed opportunity in the world of if you're not sending them in Word, if you're using an interactive tool to do it, because there's so much you can use video for. So obviously you can show like explainer videos or product demos, or maybe an advertising firm or a marketing firm, you can show like some of the videos that you produce for clients, like case studies. But one of the simplest and maybe most effective ones to use is the personalized video in the executive summary. And we do that with, I think all of our proposals include that.
Yeah, we do a personalized executive summary using Vidyard in all of our proposals. So we have that integrated into Proposify. Again, it's that personalized touch. This wasn't one-to-many, this is one-to-one. And you can go through the executive summary in a little more of a gauging way versus just text on the page, because I'm sure there's going to be other pages on your proposal that are in text that people are going to check out as well. So yeah, getting that personalized video, getting that right in the proposal. And the big thing is finding a way to do it so that it plays in the proposal and doesn't take the customer out to another tab in their browser, because then that's sort of distracting them from the proposal where you want them to be. So that's a really big key of it.
If you send a proposal as a PDF, which most people in the world do, PDFs or Word documents, is that you can still embed a video, but it's really just going to be like a thumbnail. They click on it, it opens in Vimeo or Vidyard or whatever. It's not terrible, but to your point, it's not the best way to do it if you can just keep them right there in the document. And also the videos are a way to get in front of other stakeholders. So it's people who haven't been, the CFO who maybe holds the purse strings hasn't been involved in the sales cycle, and maybe the seller has tried, but they just can't get them on any calls. If they're viewing the proposal, then this is a way for the sales rep to present themselves and not just rely on just purely what the content that's been written.
Beauty of a lot of those video tools as well is like that's another data point where typically they will track who views it, or at least how many views you're getting. And so not only do you have some metrics from your proposal and Proposify, but now you've got metrics from the video, and you can kind of overlap those to figure out what the heck's going on, because that's what every sales rep wants. They want visibility into what's happening.
Some of the other interactive pieces that we talked about a little bit were pricing. So this is, again, what sort of separates maybe a traditional proposal with just a simple table of pricing or even just one number from being something that is more interactive. And even if you're just using a quoting tool to do it, you can still do this kind of thing, which is often when you're selling a higher priced service, we tend to, do all this discovery and all this scoping work, and then we just get to a number. Often the best way to price is a good, better, best model. It doesn't work in every instance. Sometimes a company might sell based on a number of like transactions or data points, or they might do core plus more. But good, better, best is such a time-tested, proven model, and it can work for any industry, even if you're not SaaS. So the idea is that early on, they're going to ask about the number, like how much does this thing cost? And you could say, oh, well, it's always different, but it usually starts around this, or it tends to be around this. When you show the pricing, you want to guide them to the middle offer, which is what you expect they'll pay or what they expect they should be paying. But you can always have the more robust tier or the cheaper tier. So maybe it's like, this is outside of our budget, or we're not really ready to get started with this. They can always fall back to the cheaper package that maybe doesn't include as much. And that if they buy it, then over time you can sort of maybe get them up to where they need to be. Such an underused tactic. And you can do this in your pricing tables by just making that optional. So basically being like pre-select the middle tier or the big tier, but then allow them to self-serve to the lower one and giving them options, because if you just present one price, it's so easy to say, no, that's too much.
What we do a lot of times is we use that in just a more micro way we sell by seat count. So there may be a seat count that's been discussed, and we do have some baselines. So we'll put in the baseline seat count, and if there's been a little bit of back and forth on, we might add a few more seats, we'll give that optionality in the proposal. And then we get a lot of passive, essentially upsells, just by giving people the ability to say, you know what, instead of 15 seats, I actually want 20. And they tick that up to 20, and boom, we've got a lot more revenue in the door than we thought we would. And who doesn't like that?
Right, so looked at the data, and using interactive pricing did increase the close rate by 6%, we found. Now, what it doesn't tell us, and I think what we can go back and find is like, what does it do for deal size? Because I think that's really the main thing. Is it's not necessarily going to have a huge impact on close rate necessarily, but it can be that thing that just is the passive upsell drives deal size. So the idea, though, is that it's now become a two-way document, if you will. It's not just the company proposing, putting things out there. It's also collecting information from the prospect. And what we found in State of Proposals was that including interactive form fields in your proposal would slow down the deal cycle by not a small amount, by about 36%, but it would have like a 46% lift on close rates. I'm not sure why, but it can be a tool at your disposal to, again, like create more interaction within. And sometimes there is just information you need to collect from a prospect in order to remove as many barriers or touch points in between just getting them signed.
I think the interactive fields in a proposal, depending on at which stage you use your proposal, probably indicates buyer intent. So if you're using your proposal as an agreement, you're asking for a few pieces of information at the end, it's likely those folks that are really like ready to buy that are going to fill that out. And sometimes they may have to hunt down one or two pieces of that information before they can fill it in. So then you get that bit of delay, but likely those close more often. So I think in our world, we do see that at times. And what we like to do is you can put some fields in the proposal, but just make them optional. And it's like, hey, if you don't know this, no big deal, because we don't want it to slow down the deal. So it's like, if you can fill this in, great. But if you can't, all good. We'll sort it out after, because at the end of the day, you just always want to just get the deal signed, and a lot of the logistics can happen after the fact.
So this is kind of an interesting stat about revisions. So State of Proposals found that proposals that made one revision had a 30% higher close rate. Proposals with two revisions had a close rate 43% higher. And after three revisions, proposals had 52% higher close rates. And I think there was some drop off after that. Why do you think that going back and making revisions or changes to a proposal is going to necessarily increase the likelihood it closes?
It's likely to do with those revisions are coming from requests from the prospect, right, or the customer. So whenever you get into that back and forth, it is a really positive sign and kind of a buying signal. I think that is why you're seeing the close rate go up as more and more revisions come in. I would also wager that there is probably a bell curve with that, where if you get to the point where everything is a sticking point, everything needs to be changed, number one, that's probably going to start to look like a bad deal for you as the seller. And if there's not sort of a mutual benefit to the sale, you might want to ask yourself if it's worth doing.
I don't think we specifically came out and said this. We did talk about making it easier for your prospects to buy, but just one of the interesting stats was that using e-signature would make it 3.3, very specific, X times more likely to close, 330%, something like that. I think that just, again, goes to show that, like, remove as many obstacles as possible. Don't send out multiple documents. If you can send one, just put the one-click order button right there in the proposal.
Yeah, I think at this point in time, e-signatures is like table stakes. People are very comfortable using that, and if you don't have it, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. So there's no shocker that speeds it up. I mean, no one has a printer anymore. It's like a huge hassle if you got to print something out, or you'll get some wonky people trying to put images of their signatures, and then you can't really count on that because it's not legally binding. So the biggest benefit is, like, to your point, make it easy for them, and then both sides know, okay, this is legitimate as well. I can't remember the last time someone did not want to sign, an e-signature document. At least with our tool, you could pull it up on a phone. So if the barrier is people are out in the field and they're just not near like a computer, a desktop, whether it's the actual customer or prospect opening up on their phone, or if the field rep is out there visiting them, like, just have them pull it up on the phone and give it to the customer and they can sign it. That makes it easier. I certainly see the sales rep's point of view of, like, you just want to get it done, but the e-signature is just so much less friction. And again, the recording of it and the documentation of it is important. Just try to lead them to the water as much as you can and go from there.
So just related to e-signatures is that pre-signing, we found boost close rates by about 26%. I always use the close rate. It's a little bit of a proxy, right? But it just sort of suggests that doing these things are going to either cut down the time it takes to close or close at a higher rate, but still just probably good advice anyway is when you send out a proposal for signature, often you'll have, sometimes people will they'll only need a signature from the buyer. But if it's going to be a legally binding contract, it should be signed by both parties, including the seller. So just having that pre-signature in place just means that as soon as your buyer signs it, the contract is executed and it's done, versus they sign it, and now it goes to you, and maybe somebody on your team, maybe the seller doesn't have signing authority, so it needs to go to the CEO or the VP or whoever. Just get that pre-signed when it gets sent out, and it's gonna close faster.
I think it just shows that from the seller side, you care, you are prioritizing this as a company, and then you want to get started with the work or the service or the product once the document's complete.
Right. So we talked about the amount of words, the word count in a proposal. So the shorter is better. But one thing that was interesting is the legalese. So, I told that story about getting the DocuSign that was full of legalese, and it's just interesting to see what the data says about it, which is buyers spend about 3 times the time that they're going to spend on a proposal, 3 times the amount compared to other sections looking at the legal side. So the legal gets the most amount of views, which obviously means buyers are scrutinizing it more and reading these things. So the more you can actually cut down the legalese, and obviously if you want it to be a binding contract, it's got to have some stuff in there. But if you can make it more reader friendly, there is actually a template out there that you can look at that I've known about for a long time. I think it's still out there. It's made for like web design agencies, and it's a contract written in plain language. And it's still legally binding, but you feel less like somebody's trying to protect their ass, cover their ass, and more like somebody's just going like, look, hey, cancellation clause. If we decide we don't want to work together and we're already in this, we need a 30-day written notice in order to do that. Like otherwise, just writing it the way a human writes instead of writing it in a really overly legal, jargony type of way is gonna help.
I think one of the easiest ways to keep it concise is, well, at least in the software world, it's common to have terms of service or terms of use on your website, so you can link out to that, and so you can kind of summarize some stuff and then say, hey, here's the full Monty if you want everything under the sun. I'm imagining there's probably other industries where you could do that and just kind of have your boilerplate stuff hosted on a website. So that'd be the biggest thing there that I would say is try to do that. And then when you are presenting the proposal, don't be afraid to go into some of the legal terms, and especially where people tend to get hung up. Explain it, ask them if they have questions, ask them who else might need to see this, so that you might be able to get ahead of that being a sticking point when it comes to the proposals, because everyone just doesn't want to make the mistake of signing off on something they shouldn't have. It's not that they don't want to do business with you, they just want to make sure they're clear on what they're agreeing to.
Those are some of the tips that we have for proposals based on our 2024 State of Proposal. Just want to include a shout out that if you want to get full access to this report, all you have to do is go to proposify.com/state of proposals with dashes in between, or you can go /SOP, and that will send you to the same place. It's the full report, and we also have a cheat sheet that you can download, which is just the most compelling stats in a nice infographic form. So go and check that out and enjoy, and bye for now.